please welcome the Special Advisor to C40, Rohit Aggarwala.
Good morning, and thank you. It is my distinct honor on behalf of C40 to welcome now our guest speaker for today's session. Christiana Figueres took over as Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2010. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon reappointed her to that role in 2013 for a 3-year term that will take her through the important Paris COP in 2015. A long veteran of international climate diplomacy, she at first represented her nation, Costa Rica, but then quickly moved to the United Nations as a global civil servant. And I think it's fair to say, as Mayor Bloomberg did earlier today, that her presence here indicates both the power that cities have, as well as the leadership that she is providing and that the Secretary General are providing to think boldly, creatively, and about the different constituents that need to be brought to the remaining 2 years of this important process. With that, I'd like to welcome Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. Mayor Paes, Mayor Bloomberg, Mayor Tao, and to all of the rest of the distinguished dignitaries, may I borrow the wonderful African expression, all protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a summit of many firsts. Mayor Eduardo Paes is the first C40 chair from a developing country. This is the first C40 summit in Africa. And this is the first C40 meeting to invite a representative of the Climate Change Convention. May I say how delighted I am to be with you here today. I will be joined in a few minutes by the former mayor of New York, by the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen, the Deputy Mayor of Warsaw, and the Deputy Mayor of Lima. That configuration makes me extremely happy because it will be the first time in my life that I am on a panel with my past, my present, and my future sitting right in front of me. Now, usually that only happens to us if we are in the emergency room with an intense heart pain. So this is a much more welcome opportunity to see the past, present, and future of my life. And let me explain why. A little more than 4 years ago, in the recent past, we held a famous climate change negotiation in Copenhagen. While some may remember it otherwise, I actually have a very soft spot for that meeting because I will confess to you that it was there that the idea started to germinate in the head of some of my colleagues that I might be nominated to become the next Executive Secretary of the Climate Change Convention. As I took over soon after Copenhagen, I can personally vouch for the fact that the results of that famous meeting have been the backbone of climate negotiations ever since. So let me thank Copenhagen for the important guidance and in particular congratulate Mayor Jensen on his city carbon neutrality goal and inspiration for many of his peers. Last year, we were all shocked by the power of destruction of Hurricane Sandy upon New York. But not all were brave enough to publicly make the link to the growing waves of devastation of climate change. Mayor Bloomberg was clear and public in that assessment. May I congratulate Mayor Bloomberg for his courage and for the ambitious, stronger and more resilient New York plan that he developed after the storm. I am delighted that Secretary General of the United Nations has recently named Mayor Bloomberg as Special Envoy for Cities and Climate Change, and may I publicly, although he's sitting in the back, but I'm sure he can hear this, may I publicly warn Mayor Bloomberg that I will be frequently knocking on his door in that role. At the end of last year, we held COP19 and CMP9 in the most beautiful Warsaw National Stadium, maybe due, at least in part, to the excellent working conditions that were granted to the delegates. National governments in Warsaw adopted an impressive number of key decisions, including, believe it or not, one decision that will invite cities and subnational governments into the inner sanctum of the international negotiations this year to share your best policies and your best practices. The Warsaw meeting also decided to fast forward the development of the Global Climate Change Agreement before Lima. So I thank Warsaw for speeding us on our way in so many different ways. This year, in our present and in our immediate future, the world's attention on climate change turns to two major cities: New York, as it hosts the UN Climate Change Summit in September, and Lima, as it hosts COP20 and CMP10 in December. May I thank Deputy Mayor Nuñez, and through him, Mayor Villarán de la Puente, for the efforts that they are already undertaking in preparation for that portentous meeting, which will produce the draft 2015 agreement and help set the path of responsibly managed emissions well into our future. So you see, dear friends, why I feel that my past, present, and future is sitting on the panel that we will soon partake of. From Copenhagen to Warsaw to New York and Lima, I feel that I am on my life's pilgrimage and have earned, or still have to earn, the stamp of progress that each of those cities puts in my pilgrim's passport. And progressed we have at the intergovernmental level. From Copenhagen to Warsaw, and with 3 important steps in between, governments have set a 2 degrees Celsius as the maximum temperature rise that they will allow. They have set and reaffirmed a firm deadline for the new universal agreement that will guide them toward the maximum temperature. And they have a challenging work plan for this and next year. Cities have also progressed in their efforts to address climate change. Of course, cities do this in a much more granular way than national governments, because cities know what sustainability means on the ground, in every home, along every highway, every street, in every building, and in every recreation area. From Singapore to Copenhagen, from Mexico City to Bogota, I see cities dramatically improving urban transportation, reducing traffic congestion and air pollution, making those cities more livable, and, by the way, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. From Rio de Janeiro to Melbourne to Tokyo, I see cities upgrading homes and buildings, saving citizens money, making those cities more livable, and, by the way, increasing energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. From New York to here in Johannesburg, I see cities pursuing smarter infrastructure, making those cities more resilient and more livable, and, by the way, adapting to climate change. In all these examples, I say, by the way, because addressing climate change cannot be the only or even the prime reason for these measures. Now, that I would make that statement may surprise you, but it reflects that governments have an increasing number of competitive goals and challenges, and city governments can only pursue those that advance several agendas at the same time. It also reflects the fact that cities are at risk to climate change and that they are responsible for an increasing proportion of greenhouse gas emissions due to rapid urbanization. But most importantly, it reflects the fact that an increasing number of mayors are realizing that they can best pursue short-term solutions which get them elected when they do so in the context of long-term challenges, and that it is in their interest to do so. There is no doubt that national governments are progressively constructing the international regulatory framework to address climate change. There is no doubt that cities are leading the way in implementing the specific measures that improve livability and address climate change. But let's be honest, with a few notable exceptions, we have not progressed much in merging the efforts of cities and national governments. I'm sure this is as frustrating to you as it is to me. So that, my friends, is our common cause. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to you today because we need each other. You need me, or rather, you need the process I represent, and I most certainly need you. I need you because right now, national governments are working towards a universal climate change agreement. And for that agreement to be effective, it needs the input of key stakeholders. And you need me because an effective international climate change agreement opens the door not only to global reduction of emissions and increase in resilience, but to shorter-term gains with direct quality of life benefits for residents in your cities. Economic opportunity, food and water security, lower energy costs, better access to energy, improved waste management, improved transportation, improved air quality. So I invite you to work together to show national governments that a strong international agreement that is vertically integrated with city and subnational policies and measures is in everyone's best interest. Yes, there are typically more layers of bureaucracy above cities than below, and yet cities, especially megacities, are unparalleled driving forces in national and global economics. So let me make 3 concrete suggestions on how we might collaborate. First, use the metrics of the global conversation. For example, as you improve transportation, cities can set clean energy targets that are recognizable to the international process and monitor progress towards meeting those targets. That is why I'm excited about the recently released climate action report of C40, which I have not read, not even the executive summary, but I will do so. Targets for greenhouse gas emission reduction, energy efficiency, renewables, shape local development in ways that resonate to national commitments in the international process, in particular, those that reach transformative scale. Monitoring progress, setting baselines, and establishing inventories with high-quality accounting and reporting bring city-level gains to the national conversation. Most importantly, this puts cities in the position to benefit from the various incentives and financial mechanisms that are being constructed both inside and outside the Climate Convention for purposes of mitigation and adaptation. Second, cities can green their current finance, looking at value not just based on cost, but on low carbon and high resilience. For your procurement, that means supply chains of city services can become more resilient and less susceptible to market vulnerability. For your infrastructure, that changes the way value is calculated in designing, funding, and building projects. And for city government pension funds, that means investing in low carbon to ensure that climate change doesn't put incomes of retired emergency respondents and all other civil servants at risk. Third, cities can open the door to commercial funding and private investment. Lima is a very good example. Lima spent less than $1 million to attain domestic and international credit ratings, and then attracted $90 million in investment in a modernized transportation system that takes people and children to school and work quicker and with less emissions. Increasing climate finance and technology resources are coming online that could benefit cities actively seeking funding for resilience and low carbon. Now, I know that there are barriers to taking these steps, but those are barriers that we can work together to overcome. A recent report of the World Bank found that out of the largest 500 developing cities, only 4% had credit rating in international markets and only 20% in local markets. Cities that have both ratings took a long time to get there. I mentioned Lima. It took them 5 years to get both ratings. The World Bank is working on that challenge. And if we work together to streamline the process, remove the barrier, then we can kick open the funding to urban livability and climate solutions. Another barrier that I'm particularly committed to bringing down is the lack of information exchange between cities and the intergovernmental process that negotiates the climate agreement. I've been working to remove that barrier for several years, and I'm happy to inform you that we have had a little progress. We just had the first day of cities at the Warsaw COP, and cities will be an important part of the discussion at the upcoming June negotiations in Bonn. Finally, there are regulatory barriers that prevent effective policy integration between national governments and cities. Without this integration, neither countries nor cities will be effective in their efforts. I'm confident that this barrier can be removed. You, mayors, are experienced coalition builders. You can exercise your leadership as drivers of local, regional, and national economies to form partnerships, bring a united voice to the climate dialogue, and remove barriers to effective action. Distinguished mayors, as I have done in the past, I will continue to work with cities and help in any and every way that I can. My friends, in the end, we are all pilgrims, progressing along the path to a better world. It is indeed fitting that we move forward to a better world here, the hallowed ground of one of history's greatest pilgrims. At the launch of his Children's Fund, Nelson Mandela wisely stated, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." I believe that our generation of pilgrims struggles with how to leave our children a world with less adverse effects of climate change and with more opportunities. Sound governments can get us there. Therefore, I thank you for everything you have done in the past to improve the quality of life in your city. I thank you for all you are doing in the present to address the urban and the climate agenda simultaneously. And I thank you for what you're planning to do in the future to build more viable, more sustainable cities for today's children and future generations. And that, my friends, will be the moment when mayors do rule the world.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Christiana, for those important words and for the significant moment of having the leader of the UN's climate change effort here with us. I'm pleased to build on what she said in terms of calling to the stage representatives of the key cities that have been and over the next 2 years will be playing a major role in the UN climate process. To that end, I'd like to invite first Mayor Frank Jensen, the mayor of Copenhagen, Denmark. Please welcome him. Followed by Michal Olszewski, the deputy mayor of Warsaw, Poland. Welcome. And next, Mr. Hernan Nuñez, Deputy Mayor of the city of Lima, Peru. Then, of course, to re-welcome Mayor Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, president of the C40 board, and special envoy of the Secretary General for Cities and Climate Change. And then also to invite Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, to join our conversation. Well, I'd like to start, in fact, by asking you, Mayor Jensen. Copenhagen, like Kyoto, I think, will go down, and Rio, as a city that for generations will be inextricably linked to the global process of reducing climate change. You were, as I recall, mayor-elect during the COP in 2009, which meant you played, I'm sure, a very interested role watching it closely. What, as a then mayor-elect, as the mayor of a city that has been an example for every other city on this topic, and a nation, of course, Denmark, that has done so much exemplary work, what are your perspectives on that event and the lessons that we need to take forward as cities engage with a global process?
Thank you very much, Rohit. I have to first thank Christiana for all the kind words to my city, Copenhagen. Back in 2009, we have a very close cooperation with our government in Denmark, preparing the COP15. We were also hosting a mayor summit in Copenhagen. We were inviting mayors from all over the globe to come to Copenhagen. We were inviting 100 mayors, and 79 mayors were participating. Even Mayor Bloomberg were in Copenhagen, and we were very happy that so many mayors commit themselves to participate in this summit, because we could see even that the COP15 was having problems to make international new rules and new targets, binding international targets for reducing CO2 emissions. The mayors at the City Hall, all the 79 mayors at City Hall, commit themselves to a very, very proactive plan to go home and secure that we will invest in our cities to protect our cities against the change in climate, but also learn from each other, share our best visions, share our best results for investing in the right technologies in our cities. That's what we have done. We were also engaging all the citizens in the process. Starting with a lot of outreach events in Copenhagen back in winter time, with snow and very freezing weather in Copenhagen in December 2009. But a lot of Copenhageners were participating. In Copenhagen, we are talking about livability. When we are transforming our city to be more sustainable, we are talking about higher quality of life for our citizens. When Copenhageners take their bike to school or to work every day, half of the Copenhageners use their bike every day for transportation. It's a kind of livability. They want to have a better life, more healthy life, and they take a bike. When we are cleaning the water, our wastewater, before we put it into the harbor, it's because we want to give the citizens the opportunity to have a swim after work or after school in our inner harbor. And you can see today we have a lot of swimming baths in our harbor area, very close to the inner city. That's so. Our green visions is a part of our history about a livable city, and also to create new jobs for our citizens. I'm glad that our investments plan in this transformation to be a carbon neutral city. We have the ambitions to be carbon neutral in 2025. We are on the right target because we have now reduced our CO2 emissions with 40% from 1995 until 2012. That's, I think it's a world target, and I think it's very ambitious, but we can see to be carbon neutral in 2025 is very ambitious, but I think also realistic. So we are engaged with our government at national level, but we are also engaged with our partners in the business and industry. They are part of our philosophy of this triple helix strategy to create a livable city, to create new jobs, and make a more sustainable city.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Jensen. And of course, Copenhagen sets such a remarkable example and inspires so much of what so many cities in the C40 do. I understand from some of our conversations you have a very good relationship with your national government's policies in the way that Christiana described really support you. Michal, you have a slightly different challenge in some ways in Warsaw, where you had this great event and I know your mayor played a leading role in it. But much like Mayor Tao described the city of Johannesburg, the city's policies take place in the context of a national power grid that is fueled by coal. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about your experience at the COP last December and the ambitions of the city of Warsaw in the context of Poland.
I also want to thank you for the kind words from Martina about the COP success, let's say, in the term of the engagement of the cities. It's true that, and I can agree that it was a challenge for us just to improve a dialogue about the cities and the involvement into the process of the dialogue about the climate change, which is followed by the United Nations. Starting from the conference in Copenhagen, we had a personal ambition just to make a point and just to summarize the discussion and make a step forward in the discussion, let's say, what we can do more about engagement of the cities in this process. We had also a very big support from our ministry, and as we are now as a country, as a president of the conference, we still have a good contact with the Ministry of Environment, just to feel what are the gap in the process, in the dialogue, that we can fill with some intervention from our side, with some input from the cities. Actually, we were concentrated on one event during the COP to organize for the first time a city day, which was for the last day of the COP conference, with also contribution from the Ban Ki-moon, from the Secretary General, and also with the contribution from the cities from around the world. There was a contribution from the African cities, South American, and also European, of course. But what was most important for us, it was just to make some conclusions, what we can do more, and how we can improve this dialogue. We conclude that it should be a very strong point on the organizing a technical expert meetings in the 2014 before the conference, because we as a cities, we still expect to have a support from the national governments and also from the COP conference process, just to improve our awareness about the technologies, about the methods how to tackle the climate issues problems. We have to start a debate or discuss how to shape the financing instruments, not only for the cities but also for the citizens, and how to involve also the citizens into the process of the combating climate change problems, with the special focus on these actions with the high mitigation potential. Because as a city, we have some experience which prove a theory of Pareto, that sometimes 20% of money which we invest give us 80% of effect. So sometimes it's not about the money, it's about regulations. It's sometimes about some contributions from the citizens, which is very obvious. I can give you, just to finalize this intervention, 2 examples from the city of Warsaw, how we are understanding this policy, this, let's say, two dilemmas of each cities, especially in the Central Eastern Europe, which I'm representing in the C40. The cities which are lagging behind with the infrastructure has the problem that we are investing a lot of money in the infrastructure. I can give an example. We reduce by 0% the emission of the wastewater to the river in 2011. It was done by a really serious effort from the city, but we improve the quality of the water in the river by several percent. So it shows how sometimes we invest a lot of money in the infrastructure, which gave us an effect which is not comparable with the capital which is invested. At the same time, we introduced a biking system. It was the model sometimes somehow copied with from Copenhagen. We have the 8th system in Europe now, with 2,000 of bikes in the system, with 1 million of renting by 1 year. And this increased a number of the users using daily bike by 8% and reduce a number of the individual cars by 10%. It shows how sometimes the small changes in the space can change in commons and habitudes by the individuals. So my conclusion from the COP in Warsaw is that we need more discussion to be included in the process of the COP conferences. We also expect a contribution from the national government, and we also expect to discuss not only about an effect, but also about the instruments that we can implement to get the reduction of CO2 emission. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Hernan, so after Warsaw, next Lima. What do you see as your ambitions as the host city of the next COP and a very important meeting for the overall process?
Sí, en principio, buenos días tengan cada uno de ustedes. Para mí es un enorme placer estar aquí. Nosotros, como próxima sede del COP, esperamos principalmente que las ciudades tengan un rol también activo y bastante participante en este tipo de cumbre y de sus conclusiones, toda vez que las ciudades son uno de los principales actores en cuanto a la mitigación. No solamente debe verse a nivel de gobiernos nacionales, sino que estos tienen que tener como aliados principales a las ciudades, sobre todo a las grandes urbes, como puede ser Lima, entre otras ciudades del Perú. Es por eso que para nosotros es una enorme oportunidad para que el gobierno nacional
We believe that Lima has implemented a series of public policies that have led us to the preparation of COP and also the Pan American Games in 2016. And we think it's a result of our public policies that result in a rethinking of the nature of our cities during the last 20 years. Our cities have developed an important transformation of transport, which means less time in transport, and also labor rights for those involved in transport. Also, there's a modernization of transport, and it reduces the emissions of all of the emissions of the CO2. And what we have done also is that in the poorest cities, we're trying to build parks with the neighborhood or associations. There's a planting of trees, and we also have in the settlements, we have planting of trees that do not consume a lot of water, and this has had a positive impact. At the beginning, part of the opposition to our measures believed that this wouldn't be at all positive, but now they have also recognized that these plantations mean safer neighborhoods and also ecological neighborhoods as well. And this has meant that our objectives have meant 500,000 trees that have been planted in 4 different districts. We have a project on the hills of Lima, in the coastal area. It's a very specific area on the coast, And there are regions of the coast that is completely desert, and they become green. They have been affected because of invasion of certain lands, and through these programs of the municipality of Lima and other municipalities of districts, we've been able to recover these hills that have become eco-tourist areas for during the entire year. And we have also begun to recover these hills as green areas, ecosystems, and they were even affected by a series of negative impacts of climate change. And we have begun 2 projects, which is to work with the popular sectors in small plantations at their homes or within their communities, schools, etc., not only with economic gain, but to begin also ecological training for children. And in the popular sectors, which is the sector that will take care of those areas. Then it's also another project of Lima working against the rubbish and participating against the waste through the processing and recycling of the waste within the cities. Lima is the metropolitan municipality divided in 43 districts. And each district is independent in some ways. So there are political criterias which have been difficult to implement, and Lima has difficulty in intervening in each one of the 43 districts. So COP might lead us to a greater coordination amongst all of the districts in the city.
Excellent, thank you. And that's fascinating, and of course proves the point that while there may be fewer layers of bureaucracy below mayors, there aren't 0 layers of bureaucracy below mayors, and I'm certainly looking forward and hope to be at Lima myself. Mayor Bloomberg, even though you have just been appointed by the UN to this role, you are, whether you like it or not, actually a veteran of the UN climate process. You spoke to the Bali conference in 2008, where you asked the delegates to appoint mayors to their national delegations. You participated at the Mayor's Summit in Copenhagen that Mayor Jensen described. You were at Rio +20 with C40. And perhaps I could ask you to build on your remarks from this morning. What's the different message that mayors bring that national governments can't bring? What is that message?
Well, I think it comes from the different jobs. At a federal level, national level, number one, you have to deal with a very broad, diversity of people and how they live and what their interests are. Suburban areas and rural areas and urban areas have different focus. The diversity would tend to be in the cities, and it's much more uniform and the further away you get. Agrarian society, traditionally, there's a dependence only on your family. The contact with the next farm is far away, and so traditionally you don't talk to your neighbors all the time. In the city, you see them going in and out of the building, the elevator, going down the steps to the subway, in line at Starbucks or the kiosk for a newspaper. So how you behave is different, and how you interface with your constituents is different, and what the job is different. At a federal level, I don't mean to underestimate what they do, but their job is to look at long-term policy things and redistribute wealth. You tax people and then you give grants out to different areas to accomplish things that are in the national interest. But generally, presidents, premiers, prime ministers, and even governors don't administer the programs. Now, the President of the United States runs the biggest organization. There's a couple million people in the Army, a couple of million other people. So there's some, But it's not the same. The job of a mayor is to represent the people at the local level and provide services where the public can see whether those services are good or bad, are satisfying their needs or not. And the press tends to go where the public is because that's where they get viewers, listeners, or readers, and so they focus a lot more on what mayors do. And I think all governors are envious of mayors getting press coverage for the big cities in their states. If there's no big city, then it's sort of all spread around. But, you know, you've got to feel sorry for the governor of Illinois or the governor of New York or the governor of California, Georgia, where there's a few big cities and just naturally the reporters would go to their press conferences rather than to the press conferences of the governors. So the people also expect something different from mayors. I was talking to Mayor Tao the other day. Everybody expects him to provide the services, even when those services are not his responsibility. In New York City, everybody thinks that I'm responsible for the subways and the buses. And the truth of the matter is it's a state agency that does that. The city has no representation on their at a management level. We have some members of the board, but the executive director and the chairman are appointed by the governor, and they're the ones that really run it. And yet, people blame me if the subways don't work. And the same thing is true. People blame mayors for education. They think they're responsible for education. Now, in New York City, the mayor is responsible for education, but I was the first mayor that was responsible for education. It took a long time and a hard-fought battle to get that responsibility. In a lot of places, the mayor has no say in education, but if it's your kids, the mayor's the one you can talk to, and so you sort of blame the mayor. And the same thing is true for policing and a lot of things like that. So I think it comes from very different jobs, and the mayors dialogue with the public a lot more. You know, the president, the prime minister, the premier, they're in a bubble, they're far away. The governors, to some extent, they can't get around their states or regions that quickly. The mayor every day walks the streets and sees the people, and they complain and demand services. And one of the things that they want is clean air, clean water. They want jobs, so the congestion that keeps them from being able to go to the store or get to the school or get to the hospital, medical care, all of these things. They look to the mayor even when the mayor doesn't have responsibility. And so it's not unusual, it's not surprising that mayors would focus on climate change. Because when the streets flood, you blame the mayor. When the tree falls down and knocks down the power lines, you blame the mayor. When the water doesn't come out of the spigot, you blame the mayor. And so mayors would just naturally fill the vacuum that the national and state levels have left. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a lot better dialogue. I think one of the things that Christina can really do, and the United Nations does, is help mayors get the attention of the national state governments, because that is where the tax base is, and that's where you've got to go for money, and a lot of things are controlled by, as I said, the state and the federal government, and the laws require you to get some permissions from them.
Excellent. So what I've heard, to come back to Christiana, I think there are a couple of themes here. There's a closeness to the people, right, which is both an awareness among the population and also the presence that Mayor Bloomberg described. There's the different job of delivering services that tomorrow people would very much notice if the subway doesn't run or the garbage isn't picked up. And then there's this megaphone that you described, getting the attention of the newspapers. How would you recommend, or how do you see the greatest impact that the C40 mayors, Christiana, can have on the next two COPs?
Well, first, Mayor Bloomberg, I'm very glad to know that when the streets flood that I can blame my mayor. I usually blame climate change, but it's much easier to blame the mayor.
Harder to yell at climate change, right?
It's hard to yell, yeah, and particularly they don't get reelected, right?
And it's not PC to blame God.
That's true. But it is the conundrum that we're in, right? I mean, I continuously think how amazing it is that all of these wonderful cities prepare for a full year to host the climate convention. we descend upon them, all 10 to 25,000 of us. We descend upon these cities, do the work, and then we leave. And the conversation between the cities and those that arrive, the national governments, is not where it needs to be. We have to make everybody understand that this is not an exercise of mutual exclusion. This is actually an exercise of collaboration and inclusion, because it is only, as I said before, it really is only through integrating incentives, financial instruments, policies, that we will be able to address this. And I think there are two ways that we need to pursue sort of a two-prong approach at the same time. One is at the national level, where mayors must raise their voice with national leaders in cabinets, with ministers, whether they're of the same political party or not, to truly make them understand that it is in cities that all of this action, or most of this action, is occurring, can occur, should occur, and that they need the support. So at the domestic level, that conversation needs to be strengthened. And then, of course, at the international level, which is where we've been pushing a lot, and where the attention of cities as a group of very, very important stakeholders needs to be raised. And hence, I'm very much looking forward to the first ever, unbelievable, the first ever session in June that will officially invite city input into the international negotiations. But I think we have to do it at both levels, at the international level, at the process level, and domestically.
So on the domestic front, I wonder if I could ask, perhaps Michal, I could start with you, and then Mary Jensen, and then Hernan. What kinds of conversations have your cities had with your national governments about the national climate agenda? What I mean to say is, we here at C40 often point out that cities are where so much is already happening, where there's so much potential. Last year in Rio, we released C40's Rio numbers that show that the C40 cities have 1.2 billion tons in annual reduction potential. If it's achieved, are you in dialogue with your national governments about the national climate policy? And to what extent do you think the national governments are aware of the potential that the cities could deliver if they were resourced and empowered, as Christiana suggests? Do you have a perspective?
It's sometimes it's very hard discussion with the national level, because basing on the subsidiarity rule, we are acting with the problems at this level when we can solve it. If we can solve it, we always claim for the money. We're begging for the solutions, or for the some changes in law which is needed for our daily work. That's true. That was Mayor Bloomberg said, that it's the other perspective. I know it from my personal experience, because I was working for 7 years for the central administration, for the national level, and then I changed my job for the city, became deputy mayor, and I see the difference and the perspective where you have to deliver the services which is really needed by the citizens. And even if I'm going back from this conference, my citizens going to ask me by Facebook what I achieved on the conference. Really, that's the really challenge, because they want to understand why we are active on the process on the international level, what they can have from this process. The most important thing at the national level is to have people on this dialogue who are really understanding the problems of the people, and who are understanding our perspective. Central administration or national administration in our country, we are a central country as Denmark as well, so we are not federal. We always expect to deliver such, let's say, solutions which we can really implement. I don't want to say more, but to talk about more. But we are now in the process of changing of management of the waste management in the country, and it's the most critical process in the last few years in the cities in our country. By very small, let's say, arrangements which are in the legal acts, we have a lot of problems to tackle, to solve the problems, how to take waste from the citizens. That's the point, that we are not engaged as we has to be in the process of the preparing of legal acts as a national level, and we expect to have it. Somehow I'm happy that we success with this City Day and this conference in Warsaw, because I believe that it was a very important sign to national governments that we are really important and we are really keen to be in the process, because we want to solve the problem of our citizens.
Thank you. Please, Mayor.
In Denmark, we have a very long tradition to have a very close cooperation between the national government, the national level, and the municipality, the local level, and the local governments. And I'm very often in dialogue with cabinet ministers on climate issues, on CO2 reduction. Our government have an ambitious national plan, climate plan, to become a fossil-free society for the whole country in 2050. And they also support international binding target for CO2 reduction at the national level of the government, and supported by the majority in the parliament. So we have a similar vision, and we are cooperating very closely. Let me give you a concrete example. After the COP in 2009, and I was taking over as mayor in Copenhagen in 1st of January 2010, in 2011 we have a very, very heavy rain, a cloudburst in Copenhagen. The streets was flooding, and we were setting up a cooperation committee between the national level. The Minister for Environment invited me and other mayors and business and industry and research to set up a plan, a national plan for climate adaptation for the whole country. And we were, of course, in Copenhagen, we must be very proactive because the street was flooding. So we have to invest very fast. So I contacted the Minister for Finance. I said, you have to give us new rules for investing and financing these very fast investments in the city, protecting our citizens against the floating city. So I think that's how it must function between the national level and the local level, because we have to handle, as Bloomberg said, the voters, the citizens blame their mayor if the city are floating, if the water goes to the basement and not into our harbor. So I think we can show other cities and other countries how we can have very proactive cooperation between the national level and the local level. Myself, I have experience for many years in national politics. I was 20 years in national parliament, and I was serving as minister, cabinet minister in the 90s. So I have also very good relationship between all the political leaders in the parliament. And I think that's right. You have to have a very broad political commitment to this agenda, even if it's your own party is the ruling party at national level or the opposition who's ruling. So I use my position to discuss climate change with both sides of the parliament, not only my personal favorites in parliament.
Fascinating. And actually, Mayor Bloomberg and then Deputy Mayor Nuñez.
What occurs to me is, let me start, given the honor that I've had to help the United Nations, I've started to learn diplomatic speak.
I'm sorry for you.
Turns out that SG is the Secretary General. Who knew? It turns out that a face-to-face conversation is a bilateral, although you told me this morning a bilat. But I think what really happens in countries is you have unilats. Everybody talks and nobody listens. And I can only tell you about America, where, in all fairness to the president, I don't know how high, I think he would say environmental climate change is high on his agenda, but he really has gotten no help from the legislature whatsoever. The legislature is immobilized for political reasons. The only good thing is every time we have another natural disaster, you pray that it happens in a place where the elected officials have been saying climate change is not real, because that's the only thing that's going to get them to wake up and change. And I don't know that they've changed their beliefs. I'm not even sure they have any beliefs, but they've certainly stopped saying that climate change is a commie plot. But still, certainly in the United States, the reason cities are where the action is number one, the job, and that's where the problems are because of the concentration of people. But it's also true that they get fundamentally no help from the federal government, and the best that they can hope for is that the federal government totally tunes out, because tuning in a little will just stop everything. You'd be better off if they just let you go and do whatever you do in your cities. And I'm not so sure that isn't true a lot of places around the world.
Interesting. I mean, in contrast, of course, to Denmark, which is best practice in so many ways.
Denmark is a leader, and sadly my country is not. And it's very sad. We are a big country. We generate a lot of the world's greenhouse gases. Now, the good news is that if you look, it's the private organizations like the Sierra Club with private philanthropy that have gone and closed a third of the coal-fired power plants. We've reduced the pollution in the United States dramatically. And it's almost, there's a little bit of help from the federal government, but I think it's fair to say it is all the private sector and cities that have gone and pressured it. And even was a coal-fired power plant on the Potomac River just upwind of Washington, D.C., and they breathed all the stuff that was coming into the air. And they still weren't smart enough to do something. You'd think they'd at least take care of their own air. It finally closed, but it was because of the people that lived in that neighborhood and not the elected officials who were also breathing the bad air.
Deputy Mayor Nuñez, perhaps you could say a little bit about the relationship between Lima and the Peruvian government, both in terms of general policy and on climate change.
Sí, bueno, como lo dije en la primera.
As I mentioned in my first intervention, there's a relationship with the Ministry of Environment, but we should think of the way in which the national governments should respect the way in which local governments work. In the case of Lima, because of the metropolitan municipality, and because of political issues, like the dialogues are not dialogues, but sometimes they are arguments. Sometimes we think with local mayors that we want to plant trees, as I mentioned before, and the local mayor tries to avoid this, to prevent this. Fortunately, the population is sometimes the population sees themselves working against the local mayor. The important thing is that the national governments respect the local authorities. We are trying to implement a model of city that is not only of a 4-year term, but we are trying to implement measures that are going to transcend our own government. But unfortunately, sometimes national governments, we have been in the half of the period of President Garcia, and now half of the period of President Ollanta. For example, we say that in this avenue we want to implement BRT, but then the national government says no. So we need to have a dialogue without competing against each other. Sometimes the national government is imposing their own criteria, so sometimes we have to rephrase or reform our local measures. So I think it's very important that in these kind of conferences and these kind of events, we try to coordinate the work of local governments and national governments. It doesn't make any sense that local governments are trying to implement a program and the national government is trying to prevent it from working. So sometimes we have the situation, like in Peru, is when national governments are imposing measurements on local governments, and we have to simply accept what they say.
Into the category of the unilat, as Mayor Bloomberg coined the term. Christiana, with this context, and Michal, perhaps you also, since Poland, of course, will play a big role in the June meeting, as it is still the president of the COP, how do you see this June interaction going? What did you take away from the mayor's involvement in Warsaw in terms of what's the message that the mayors are going to bring? What do you think the ministers are really open to hearing from the mayors?
Well, I would describe it as creeping wisdom. And it's creeping forward because unfortunately it's moving very, very slowly. So the city's day that the COP president in Warsaw was smart enough to call was very helpful because it began to bring a conversation that has been literally outside the walls of the negotiation, at least inside the wall of the negotiation. But I would say that was a first step, and that's excellent first step, but it truly wasn't inserting the cities into the conversation of what are we going to do about this yet. So that's why I think it's very important that in June, federal governments, national governments have actually extended an invitation to cities. How that is going to be done, we don't know yet because they need to design that. They need to figure out how they're going to do that in June. But you can rest assured that everything that we can do to support the active voice of cities themselves. What we definitely would not like is somebody else speaking for cities, because then a lot gets lost in translation, and in the UN we have 6 languages, and so translation gets very, very complicated. So we would certainly prefer to have direct voices of both good stories and bad stories, and I think you can learn a lot. So Copenhagen and Denmark and the relationship there could be a very, very good example, and then we have unfortunately many other examples where that conversation is still stuck. And I think we need to hear from both so that we can begin to understand what are the paths of opportunity, what barriers are there, and what needs to be broken down. And all of this needs to actually be fast-forwarded, because the draft agreement will be on the table at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of December in Lima, Peru. And it is my expectation that that draft agreement would already have in it the repository of where city action is going to be recognized and supported by the intergovernmental process.
That's interesting, because that is such an accelerated timeline. I've heard you made this point before, that while we talk about the end of 2015 as the target, in fact, this is the most crucial year, because 2015 is the details, this is the big decisions. We've only got 2 more minutes, so let me ask our panel to very quickly, one of the other things that you pointed out was that climate change cannot even be the principal reason for doing most of these things. How do you package your climate action in your cities? I know that climate resonates with the population differently in different countries. How does it work in Copenhagen?
We will continue on focusing on livability to create and develop our city with a high quality of life. So the going green is not longer a choice, it's a must because of the climate change. All people can see that in our part of the world. So we will continue to develop this strategy, thinking on livability, and engage our citizens personally in this plan, because it gives the broader political commitment also in city council if we engage our citizens in it, so they can be a part of it. When they bicycle, when they have a swim in the harbor, when they are doing something, that thinking in the green development of the city and the local community.
Okay, so even in Denmark, a place that is known for having a population concerned about climate change, you focus on livability. How is it in Warsaw?
What's our lesson learned from last few years is that the climate change is in every matter of the life, of the city life. So we want to put some wider perspective on the climate change issues, even if it's touching economic development. Because I can give you an example. If we go more for the local markets, more to supporting local communities, we are decreasing a number of travels, etc., etc. So the policy of the cities should be much more wider, that we are understanding, or our colleagues from the national are understanding, that it's only environmental, only infrastructure, and we always said that the good example how important for the climate change is other instruments is biking systems. It shows how the people can change the attitude in the normal use of use of the transportation.
Thank you. And in Lima, is climate change a concern for the population?
We consider that we are implementing a series of public policies to make Lima a sustainable city. I only want to mention 3 examples. The first one is that we implemented a program of cyclists, the biggest one in Lima in its history. And we closed one of the main avenues to facilitate this. The second point is the recovery of the 3 main rivers crossing Lima. I mentioned that Lima is a desert, but the Rima River, which is the main river crossing our city, it's part of an investment of public and private sector to recover this river, which had been abandoned through the years. So I think there is a series of public policies that our administration has been implementing. We are thinking of the city of tomorrow in the framework of how we say to build a city for everyone.
Number of people that think long term, you can count in one hand. What you've got to do is you've got to bring it down to the here and now. You've got to say it's your kid breathing the air who's going to go to the hospital with an asthma attack. It's your food prices that are going to go up if we have a drought. It's your house that's going to get flooded out if that hurricane comes in this coming fall. If you make it very long term, everybody's eyes glaze over and there's plenty of excuses to delay. We don't have to focus on it right now because the economy isn't as good as we want, so we can't make infrastructure investments, or I've got an election coming up or something like that. Let me say one other thing about, since I'm no longer a mayor and maybe I can speak, although nobody would admit I'm speaking for them, I think virtually all mayors would agree with me. Mayors that want to take responsibility want the national government's money, but they don't want the national government's interference. And every executive, you would do that in your business, in your philanthropy, in your political office, in your family. You'd like to be able to, executives want to make decisions. And yes, they want input. Advice is fine, and they should listen to advice, just not too much, because their job is to lead, not to follow. They want federal aid, yes, but they want the money without strings attached. And if you can do that and get down to where the rubber meets the road and you can actually provide a service, mayors are much more effective. And those that are lucky enough to be in a situation where they have autonomy do much better than those that constantly have another level of government with so-called checks and balances, which is really just a ways to stall and do nothing.
Excellent. Well, we will leave that as the last word. I want to thank our panel, Christiana Figueres, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Deputy Mayor Nuñez, Deputy Mayor Olszewski, and Mayor Jensen. Thank you very much.